Hi, I'm Charles with AniCap. The story begins as a guy nervously rides on a train. When he gets off, he begins to run frantically, but he's found by a group that somehow knows his secret. This group covers the area in smoke, and the man shows his insane fighting skills as he fends off several attackers. The attackers launch several blades at this guy, so he pulls out a blade of his own to fight back. The attackers then use metal needles called senbon, but this guy has crazy reflexes, catching them with his teeth and firing them back at the attackers. Unfortunately, this man is overwhelmed by their sheer number. He is captured when a contraption takes hold of his neck, and he's dragged by a terrifying looking man. This evil guy slams the man into the ground and uses his sword to finish him off. The attackers use a device to confirm that their target has been eliminated, and they leave. Elsewhere, a farmer named Joe enjoys life on the farm and eventually returns home to work on his motorcycle. He plays a game with his young son Kyle, who tries to sneak up on him, and he tells the kid that he has eyes on the back of his head. Joe's wife Sarah shows up, and she can't believe how dirty Joe's face has gotten. Kyle explains that his mask is like the ones that the Oni wear, but they are really bad people. Joe warns him that the Oni might think that he is one of them, but Kyle is sure that his big strong dad will fight them if they come after him. Joe playfully says that he isn't sure if he can win against these fictional characters, but Sarah states that she will take them out for Kyle. Joe jokingly says that he has to hurry up and finish fixing his motorcycle for when Sarah gets in over her head fighting the Oni. Later, a news report details how the man from earlier lost his life, and Sarah seems concerned that it might actually have been the Oni. Kyle is certain that it was them, but it's time for this kid to go to bed. The kid says goodnight to his mother, and Joe reminds him that his birthday is coming up. With Kyle fast asleep, Joe diligently checks the security cameras he has around his house. Sarah is concerned because of how the man was eliminated, and what's even more bothersome is that no information was found about who he is. Joe tells her that there is nothing to worry about, and assures her that no one will find them out in the middle of nowhere. Sarah is most concerned about someone called the Reaper, but Joe explains that this can't be him since he always worked alone. The next day, we get a glimpse of how cautious Joe is about hiding their identity as he wipes away their fingerprints from a door handle. The young family then goes on enjoying their peaceful life like normal, and Joe does his best to be a good father as he cheers up his son. One night, it is reported that another person lost her life at the hands of a mysterious organization. This marks one of several that has occurred recently, so a large-scale investigation is underway to find out what is happening. On Kyle's birthday, the loving family enjoys a nice cookout. They all joke around while they sing songs, and Kyle blows out the candles on his favorite type of birthday cake. Kyle opens a present to reveal a video game, and Joe gives him a new helmet as well. Joe prefers this one over the scary Oni mask, so Kyle declares that he's no longer a bad guy, he is now a hero. Sarah points out that she just likes seeing his normal face, and the entire family shares a warm embrace. They couldn't be happier, so they all tell each other how much they love one another. That night, Joe gets up from bed, but he calmly tells his wife to stay there. Joe makes his way downstairs, where everything seems fine. Just then, something appears in the window, and Joe is attacked. The attackers barge in, but Joe masterfully fights several of them off. His exceptional skill allows him to take one of their weapons, and he uses his sword to eliminate several of these men. While he's destroying one guy, Joe hears his son cry out to him. The alert Joe instantly springs into action. He blocks an attacker who tries to stop him, and absolutely destroys this guy. Joe rushes to find his family as he reaches for something, but another attacker fires 2 metal needles right through his neck. The determined Joe refuses to let that stop him though, so he crawls up the stairs. The crippling pain overwhelms him, and we see a mysterious figure outside. Joe eventually makes it to the 2nd floor, where he finds that several attackers have been eliminated. However, Joe is then horrified when he sees Kyle and Sarah's lifeless bodies on the ground. Overwhelming shock fills Joe's body, and the evil-looking guy explains that Joe's wife put up a good fight. This monster sends his blade right through her neck, igniting Joe with blinding rage, but he is stabbed in the back. Joe drags the attacker as he tries to make his way to his family, but the damage to his body is too much to overcome. The attackers find that someone must have alerted the authorities, as police sirens can be heard in the distance. The leader confirms that Joe is no longer alive, so they leave just before the police arrive. The police arrive at the scene and are horrified to find the massacred family. Sometime later, the seemingly no longer alive Joe regains consciousness. His first thoughts are memories of his lifeless family, and he vomits solely from the overwhelming emotion consuming his body. The next time Joe wakes up, he is in a hospital, and the nurse urgently calls for a doctor. Joe only says his wife's name and he passes out again. Joe eventually wakes up and a doctor explains that he miraculously came back to life after the coroner had already pronounced him dead. Joe couldn't care less and just wants to know about his wife and son. Unfortunately, he is told that they didn't make it. Outside, we see that two people have come to visit him. They are Mike and Emma, and they are from the FBI. They want help with their investigation, so they ask several questions about who the attacker might have been. Joe doesn't say a single word, but Mike can tell that he is getting very angry. This is probably the worst time to be asking him questions, so Mike just leaves his card. Mike tells Emma that it's just a hunch, but he believes that Joe knows who the attackers are. He decides that they will take turns watching him, and Emma is first up as she watches Joe on the roof. Joe has a memory to just moments ago when he was taken to say goodbye to his family. The nurse found that he couldn't move Joe anymore, and it was because Joe put the brakes on the wheelchair. Joe shook with rage and couldn't bear to come any closer to his deceased family's bodies. Back on the roof, memories of his wife and son rush into his mind, and Joe begins to growl in anger. His rage reaches its boiling point, and he reaches for his wrist again, this time pulling out a metal needle. Joe pierces himself with it, and it does something strange to his body. Just then, Joe is attacked by several assassins. He is still filled with anger, so he goes berserk and expertly takes out several of the attackers. Joe shows overwhelming strength and precision as he somehow manages to take control of the fight. That isn't all though, as Joe does some kind of jutsu and turns his body into a black smoke. This move is incredibly powerful as it allows him to eliminate several assassins in one instant. Emma has no clue what's going on, but Joe doesn't help her find out and knocks her out instead. The enraged Joe then continues his relentless attack and goes on to tear several more attackers to pieces. There are a great number of them, and Joe strangely fires a sword at the elevator. We then see why he did this, as he uses a pole to defend himself and shoves all the remaining assassins into the elevator. Even though Joe is severely outnumbered, it becomes very clear that the assassins are trapped inside with him and not the other way around. Joe stands above all their corpses as he arrives at another floor, and he strikes fear into the hearts of any remaining opponents. Mike wonders why Emma isn't answering his call and is shocked when he finds several corpses. Joe finishes up nearby, and he is found by the assassin leader. Memories once again find their way into Joe's mind, so he attacks the leader with fury. This leader is obviously not like the others though, as he defends himself well and even manages to put a contraption around Joe's neck. Joe quickly frees himself, but the fight continues to be evenly matched. Joe eventually uses his shadow skill again though, and it allows him to land a devastating attack. Joe quickly follows this up with even more strikes, and the fight is over soon after. Joe demands to know how they found him and his family, and how they knew it was really him. The leader mockingly remarks that Joe can change his appearance as much as he wants, but he will never be able to escape his fate. Joe then shocks this guy and removes his disguise. Joe doesn't say a single word from here and just ends the leader's life. Joe then goes to see his family. He can hardly bear to look and he collapses to his knees. Afterwards, Joe returns home and drills a hole into a wall. He removes a box he had hidden, and we see that it contains several items including a mask. Joe stares at a picture that once again floods his mind with memories of his family. We get one last look at his family home just before Joe sets it on fire. Joe watches as his once love-filled and peaceful life burns away, and he puts on the mask. The fire consumes every last memory, but we see that Joe is still filled with anger. Later, Joe relives the horrifying moment when his family died. This time, his wife calls out to him by his real name, Hegon. His family no longer has on their disguise, and Joe's son screams out to him. Just then, Joe wakes up from the horrifying nightmare, and we see that he has tied up the assassin leader. Joe is in real bad shape though, and collapses. Joe is surprised to hear that someone has arrived, and this man is just as shocked as he thought the next time they would see each other would be in the afterlife. This man is a doctor, and he wonders why Joe isn't wearing his disguise. Joe reveals that the organization somehow found a way to see through the masking system they were using. The doctor wonders why Joe's body always gets beat up, but he then realizes why when he sees Joe's arm. Joe used the secret art of Stark awareness, which explains what he did when he stabbed himself on the roof. The doctor tells Joe never to use it again, since it will surely end his life next time. When he sees Joe's back though, he tells him to forget about next time, since he should have died from when he was stabbed. Joe has no clue why he was able to survive, and the doctor wonders if someone out there is keeping him alive. It will take 6 whole days for Joe to make a full recovery, but he just wants to get well enough to get answers out of his guest that he has all tied up. The doctor wonders what Joe plans to do after that, and his answer is simple. He will hunt down everyone responsible for the murder of his family. The doctor gives Joe something to help him recover, but it hurts a whole lot and he passes out. After Joe recovers a bit, he goes to see the assassin leader. Joe doesn't say a single word and just gets right to punching a blade into him. Joe stabs him several times, but the man reminds him that ninjas never crack. Joe shocks him when he points out that he already knows and just continues stabbing. Joe doesn't stop as days pass, and the assassin eventually tries to ask what Joe is trying to prove. He pleads for Joe just to end his life already, but Joe just ignores him. Several more days pass, but Joe is not finished and he keeps causing the guy pain. One day, Joe douses him in gasoline. The assassin starts talking real crazy and wishes Joe would have seen the look on his wife's face. The assassin was not impressed with Joe's son since he was just scared like everyone else, but Joe's wife was different. Her eyes were filled with anger and hatred till the very end. This psycho pushes even further and tells Joe that his wife cried more and more every time he plunged his sword into her. Joe calmly tells him to listen closely, and he explains that he's going to burn his family's eyes into his memory forever. He then goes on to describe the incredible pain he's going to make him feel. Joe tells him that he will never really have this sweet relief of death, as he will always have to tremble in fear of the Oni that lie beyond. Joe lights this guy on fire, and he just watches as the assassin screams in agony. Elsewhere, Mike is taken off the investigation regarding Joe Logan. It's an order from the higher-ups as they are upset about what happened at the hospital. There were no cameras on the roof, and they don't know who the blood belongs to. Mike points out that Emma saw everything, but his boss suggests that he ask her again since she seems to have changed her story. Mike is furious with Emma for just giving up, but she laughs at how obvious it is that the higher-ups are trying to cover this up. Something shady is going on, and she knows that the best course of action is to just act obedient. In secret though, she has been investigating Logan and his family. She has discovered that they were all using aliases, and none of them actually exist. Back with Joe, he takes a look at the device that creates his disguise, and thinks back to how he was told that it would protect everyone. He then rides off on his motorcycle to begin his search, but finds that the first place he checks is empty. Joe would go on to travel long distances to check other places, but all he ever found was disappointment. The last place he checks is empty as well, and his frustration begins to mount. That night, some corrupt cops enter a bar, and they get upset when the bartender doesn't give them enough money. Joe is sitting right there, and one cop thinks it would be a good idea to ask him if his motorcycle outside is stolen. Joe just ignores this guy, so the cop asks for his license. Joe ignores him again, so the cop tries to grab him, but Joe quickly knocks him out. Joe calmly just leaves, but the other cop tries to attack him from behind. Joe doesn't even touch the guy when he throws a punch, but the sheer force from Joe's swing sends the cop flying. Outside, Joe takes a look at their cop car and is reminded of the business card that Mike gave him. The next day, Mike thinks Emma's just messing around, but she points out that she is investigating a crime. Many criminal deals are being done in virtual reality now, and she has to get this job done so they can have time to investigate Joe. Emma then explains that advancements in VR have exploded like crazy recently, and it's all thanks to the Auza company. Just then, Mike is shocked when he receives a call from Joe. He gently gets Emma off of VR and signals for her to track the call. Mike tries to get Joe to tell him who he really is, but Joe has questions of his own. Joe wants to talk, so Mike points out that they are talking, but this just makes Joe break his phone. Joe calls Mike back to give him one more chance, but warns him to stop messing around. Joe lets him decide where they should meet, so Mike chooses some restaurant. The call ends, but Emma's disappointed as she failed to track Joe. As Joe makes his way to the restaurant, we see that ads for Auza are everywhere. The ads claim that Auza technology protects everyone, and it's so important that people need to have it in every aspect of their lives throughout the entirety of their lives. Joe arrives near the restaurant and scopes it out as Mike gets there. In the restaurant, Mike tells the owner to take a walk. The owner begrudgingly agrees to leave, but tells Mike to direct any delivery guys that show up to the table by the door, since that will be where the food orders are. Joe finally arrives, but Mike wants to see his face so he can confirm that it's really him. Joe shows him the business card he gave him instead, but that isn't good enough for Mike. Joe decides to just leave, but Mike agrees to speak with him. Joe just wants to know who's responsible for the serial murders that have been happening recently, and he agrees to answer any questions Mike has in return. Mike is glad to hear that, but this crazy cop then pulls out his gun. He reveals that he isn't the type to make deals with suspects and tells Joe to get on his knees. Just then, a delivery guy comes in and picks up one of the orders. Mike wonders why Joe didn't use that moment to run away, but Joe still wants to talk. Just then, another delivery guy picks up another order. Mike tells Joe not to try anything as he cautiously makes his way around the table, and he declares that Joe is under arrest. Joe doesn't move an inch, but Mike gets annoyed when a third delivery guy comes into the restaurant. Mike gets confused when he notices that there are no more orders that need to be picked up, and this delivery guy goes in for an attack. Joe quickly springs into action to stop the strike, but his face gets exposed and Mike wonders who he is. Joe finds himself in a fight, but it's clear that this attacker is no delivery guy. Mike tries to arrest them both, but he must open fire when the fake delivery guy goes to attack him. Joe has to save him from being killed, and the fight intensifies when the attacker reveals that he has another set of arms. Joe gets pushed back, but he uses his shadow jutsu thing to bring forth 4 arms and 2 heads. The intense battle continues, but Joe simply has more arms than this guy now, and he takes hold of him. Joe pushes him back and prepares to end the fight, but he realizes that the guy's extra set of arms was actually a whole nother person that was just hiding in his bag. This second guy attacks him from behind, and Joe does his best to fight against these 2 deadly opponents. Joe then once again saves Mike and tosses some alcohol at the assassins. Joe sets his swords ablaze, and the dangerous fight rages on. Joe eventually chugs some of the alcohol and uses it to shoot a fireball at his opponents. He takes this opportunity to launch all his blades at them, pinning one guy and absolutely destroying the other. The insane fight is over, so the stunned Mike pleads for Joe to tell him who he is. Joe just says the words "pecking duck," but Mike gets upset since that is just one of the items on the restaurant's menu. Mike wants to know where the guy from the hospital is, so Joe uses the device to show him his disguise. Joe reveals that he is a ninja. These fake delivery guys were as well, and so were the guys at the hospital. Just then, the 2 of them have to take cover as the group shoots at them from outside. Things get even worse when they look outside, as one of the attackers fires a rocket at them. The entire place explodes, and the attackers take off. Joe is nowhere to be found, but we see that he's up above watching Mike. Mike looks at his chest to see that the ninja's blade cut right through his body armor. The blade doesn't even have a single scratch on it, even after the entire fight with Joe, so Mike wonders who could have made such a crazy weapon. Just then, the ad for Auza pops up behind him, and both guys stare at it as it makes its pitch for why everyone needs Auza technology in their life. Elsewhere, a man named Zai informs his master that their target is unfortunately still alive. The master is upset by this, and says Higan's name. Thanks for watching my recap. Sign up to my free newsletter if you want to show some support to the channel. Link is in the description.